Comrades, awaken. Look around you and see the world as it truly is, not as the masters tell you it is, not as the politicians and preachers would have you imagine. The wealth, the power, the so-called order, these are not the results of strength, of talent, or of moral superiority. No, the rich do not rule because they are strong. They rule because we, the working class, the laborers of this world, remain divided. They rule because we have been convinced to compete with each other rather than to unite. Because we have been trained to envy, to fear, and to obey. The capitalists, the bourgeoisie, do not fear their strength, they fear our unity. For in unity lies the power that no palace, no fortress, no army of hired guns can withstand. The working class is vast, indispensable, the source of all wealth. Every brick laid, every machine turned, every product created, all flows from our labor. Yet, despite this undeniable truth, we are fragmented. We are fragmented by divisions of race, religion, nationality, and by the very ideologies manufactured, to prevent us from seeing that our chains are common and our liberation possible only together. Consider the system that oppresses you. Capitalism thrives not by virtue of productivity or innovation, but by exploiting our labor while hoarding the fruits for a few. They keep us distracted with illusions of choice while we are bound by the same wage, the same scarcity, the same exploitation. Every strike broken, every protest quelled, is a testament not to our weakness, but to our disunity. If we were united, there would be no boss, no landlord, no banker capable of resisting our collective power. Look deeper, comrades. Observe the cleverness of the ruling class. They do not merely take your labor, they take your mind. They pit worker against worker, immigrant against citizen, man against woman, apprentice against master. And in doing so, they ensure that the real chains, the chains of economic oppression, remain invisible while we squabble over crumbs. They rule not because their swords are sharper, but because we have allowed ourselves to be taught to fight each other instead of rising together. But let us not despair. The history of humanity is a history of struggle, and struggle is the teacher of the oppressed. Just as the bourgeoisie did not inherit their wealth but seized it through systems of domination, so too can we reclaim our power through organization, solidarity, and courage. The key is simple yet profound: unity. Recognize your common interest with every worker, with every peasant, with every soul crushed under the weight of exploitation. Recognize that the system that impoverishes one of us impoverishes all of us, and the system that chains one of us chains all of us. Workers of the world, you are stronger than you realize. Each factory floor, each office, each field holds the seeds of revolution. Each hand that labors, each mind that thinks, each heart that hopes is a weapon more potent than any cannon or law. When we stand divided, rich can laugh, and they do. But when we stand together, nothing they have amassed, no fortress they have built, no army they command, can withstand the collective might of the people. Rise then! Organize, unite. Let the illusions of division crumble beneath the weight of truth. Let the false distinctions of race, creed, and nationality fall away to reveal the one reality that binds us all, the exploitation of our labor and the theft of our power. Strike not with fists alone, but with knowledge, with solidarity, with the unwavering conviction that a new society is possible. A society in which the wealth we create is shared, in which labor is dignified, in which no human is reduced to a commodity. History does not wait for the timid. The moment for courage is now. The chains that bind us are not eternal. They are forged by human hands and can be broken by human hands. Stand together, and the illusion of their strength will vanish. Stand divided, and their domination will continue indefinitely. The choice is ours, comrades, and the consequences are real. Unite or remain subjugated. Organize or be consumed, rise or be trampled. Let the ruling class hear this warning. Your power rests on our silence and our division. If we recognize our unity, if we act collectively and fearlessly, your reign will crumble. The rich do not rule because they are strong. They rule because we are divided. The time has come to end that division and reclaim the world that belongs to those who create it. Workers of the world, unite. The ruling class does not rule because of some intrinsic superiority or greater strength. Their power is not born of personal courage, intellect, or moral right. Instead, their dominance is a construct, meticulously maintained through the systematic division of the very people whose labor sustains the world. The foundations of their rule are built upon the splintering of society into factions, groups, and identities that are encouraged to compete against one another rather than recognize the commonality of their oppression. Workers are made to see each other as rivals rather than allies, to perceive scarcity as a personal failure rather than a systemic design, and to believe that the advancement of one individual necessitates the subjugation of another. This division is cultivated through culture, education, religion, and politics, all of which are manipulated to create artificial hierarchies and false distinctions. The working class is taught to envy, fear, and mistrust their neighbors, while the ruling elite accumulates wealth, power, and control, often without engaging in any labor themselves. By keeping the majority divided, the ruling class ensures that no unified force emerges to challenge their authority. Every worker, every peasant, every laborer possesses the capacity to create, sustain, and even overturn the structures of society. Yet this capacity remains dormant when workers are fragmented and pitted against each other. Consider the wages of a factory laborer compared to the profits of the industrialist who owns the factory. The worker's labor produces the wealth, the machines, and the commodities, yet the industrialist claims ownership and control. If workers recognize their collective strength and refuse to allow themselves to be isolated, the very systems that oppress them would collapse. Division operates not only through material inequality but through ideology. Workers are told that their station is deserved, that success is a matter of individual merit, and that solidarity is a threat to personal advancement. These ideas are reinforced daily through media, educational institutions, and social norms. The rich do not need armies of enforcers to maintain obedience. They rely on our internalization of division, on our willingness to see each other as competitors rather than collaborators. In workplaces, communities, and families, the seeds of rivalry are sown. Workers are made to compete for jobs, for promotions, for recognition, and for limited resources. This competition fosters a sense of scarcity and insecurity, which is then exploited to prevent collective action. Even when workers protest, strike, or demand justice, these movements are weakened by internal disagreement and conflicting interests, often deliberately encouraged by the ruling class to fracture momentum. The mechanisms of division extend to national, racial, and gender lines, which are manipulated to further fragment the laboring population. Workers are encouraged to blame each other for their hardships rather than examining the structural systems that create inequality. Education systems often teach compliance rather than critical thinking, instilling the belief that hierarchy is natural and immutable. Religion and cultural traditions can be deployed to pacify dissent, offering promises of reward in the afterlife or in future generations, while the present is controlled by those in power. Even language and narratives are employed to divide. The working class is described in terms of deficiency, laziness, or lack of sophistication, while the wealthy are portrayed as deserving, intelligent, or heroic. Such narratives shape perception, conditioning individuals to accept their oppression and mistrust those around them. The ruling class is acutely aware that a unified working class could dismantle the economic structures that sustain wealth inequality. Therefore, division is their most powerful tool, more effective than brute force, more enduring than legal codes, and more insidious than overt violence. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. When workers organize across regions, industries, and social lines, revolution, strikes, and collective movements arise that threaten entrenched elites. Conversely, when the working class remains fragmented, systemic exploitation persists with a significant challenge, and the wealthiest continue to accumulate ever greater control. Understanding the nature of division is not merely an academic exercise, it is the first step toward liberation. Workers must recognize that their apparent differences are often engineered to prevent solidarity. Only through awareness and collective action can the balance of power shift. True strength lies not in the weapons, influence, or status of the ruling class, but in the unity of those whose labor produces all value. Each individual worker possesses inherent potential, yet it is only in joining with others that this potential transforms into a formidable force, capable of restructuring society. Division is the linchpin of domination, and unity is the key to emancipation. The ruling class's power is contingent, sustained only so long as workers accept separation, internalize rivalry, and forego collaboration. Every act of solidarity, every mutual support, every recognition of shared interests undermines the structures that maintain inequality, revealing the fragility beneath the facade of invincibility. The strength of the ruling class is therefore not absolute. It exists solely because of the consent, disunity, and passivity of those they exploit, and it is within the grasp of the workers themselves to dismantle this constructed power. Capitalism is not a neutral system of exchange or a natural order of society. It is a meticulously constructed framework designed to extract value from the labor of the many while concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few. At its core, capitalism relies on the exploitation of labor, for labor produces the wealth, the goods, and the services upon which society depends. Yet, the benefits of this production are not equitably distributed. The workers, who generate the material foundation of society, are compensated only with a fraction of the value they create, while the surplus, the product of their toil, is appropriated by capitalists, industrialists, and financiers. This system ensures that the laboring majority remains economically dependent, subject to the whims of employers, and perpetual, striving to meet their basic needs, leaving little space for political consciousness, critical reflection, or collective action. The exploitation inherent in capitalism is not merely a matter of wages. It extends to every aspect of the workers' existence. Their time, energy, creativity, and even their identity are commodified. Work is structured in a way that maximizes output while minimizing autonomy, with workers often reduced to interchangeable parts in a vast industrial machine. The rhythm of labor dictates the rhythm of life, subordinating personal well-being and community life to the demands of production. Yet, while the exploitation is systematic and unrelenting, capitalism is equally adept at diverting attention from its own mechanisms of domination. The ruling class invests heavily in distraction, manipulation, and ideological control. Workers are constantly inundated with messages that frame competition, consumerism, and individual achievement as paramount, while collective interest and solidarity are devalued. Entertainment, advertising, and media saturate daily life, keeping the working class occupied with the pursuit of comfort, status, and ephemeral pleasures, obscuring the structural inequalities that constrain their existence. Political narratives reinforce this distraction, presenting issues as matters of personal choice, morality, or cultural identity rather than as the consequences of systemic exploitation. Workers are encouraged to blame themselves for their hardships, to aspire to individual success within a rigged system, and to perceive those in similar circumstances as rivals rather than allies. Division is cultivated along lines of race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, and ideology. By emphasizing superficial differences, capitalism prevents workers from recognizing their shared interests and the collective power inherent in their labor. Immigrant workers may be seen as threats to wages, women may be positioned as competitors for opportunities, and communities may be divided by political or religious allegiances, all while the fundamental structure that exploits them remains untouched. This deliberate fragmentation is central to the maintenance of capitalist dominance. The system thrives on the invisibility of its own operations, presenting exploitation as inevitable and inequality as a product of merit or personal failure. Workers internalize these beliefs, often accepting limited wages, precarious conditions, and unsafe work environments as normal or deserved. The capitalist system further entrenches its control by limiting access to education and critical knowledge, shaping the consciousness of the laboring majority so that they are ill-equipped to challenge the structures of their oppression. History shows that when workers begin to see through these illusions and organize collectively, the potential to challenge and even overturn the system emerges. Strikes, unions, social movements, and revolutions have repeatedly demonstrated that. The unity of labor can disrupt production, redistribute power, and demand justice. Yet the persistence of division and distraction ensures that such moments of resistance are isolated, fragmented, and ultimately contained. Capitalism not only extracts material wealth from labor but also erodes the social and cultural cohesion necessary for collective resistance. It transforms human relationships into transactions, cooperation into competition, and solidarity into suspicion. By keeping the working class fragmented, the system protects itself against the very force that could dismantle it, organized labor. Every distraction, every manufactured rivalry, and every ideological manipulation serves to perpetuate the exploitation of workers, ensuring that their energy is directed toward maintaining the system rather than challenging it. Even as workers toil tirelessly to sustain the wealth of the elite, their attention is diverted toward personal survival, social comparison, and consumer pursuits, preventing the emergence of a critical mass capable of confronting the underlying structures of oppression. The genius of capitalism lies not only in its capacity to exploit labor, but in its ability to obscure this exploitation through pervasive distractions, cultural conditioning, and ideological control, ensuring that the majority remain preoccupied with competing amongst themselves rather than recognizing the shared basis of their exploitation and the collective strength they hold to resist it. Unity among workers is not merely a moral ideal or a sentimental notion. It is the foundation of real power, the decisive force capable of confronting oppression and transforming society. The strength of the working class does not reside in individual skill or isolated acts of resistance, but in the coordinated, conscious, and collective action of those whose labor sustains the entire social and economic order. When workers recognize that their struggles, their labor, and their interests are shared, they begin to understand that the very structures that dominate their lives are contingent upon their disunity. It is only when they stand divided that the ruling class can extract maximum surplus, impose exploitative conditions, and dictate the terms of existence without challenge. The moment of unity is the moment of awakening, the recognition that the wealth of society is created not by the few who control it, but by the labor of the many who produce it. Across industries, across regions, and across nations, workers share common grievances: long hours, inadequate wages, unsafe working conditions, and the lack of control over the fruits of their labor. Yet, when these grievances are confronted collectively, when workers organize and act in concert, they wield almost unparalleled power. Strikes halt production, unions negotiate terms that can redistribute wealth, and social movements amplify the voices of the marginalized in ways that cannot be ignored. History repeatedly demonstrates that when workers unite, they can challenge entrenched power structures that otherwise seem immutable. The unity of labor does not eliminate difference, but it transcends superficial distinctions imposed by race, gender, ethnicity, or nationality. The capitalist system relies upon these divisions, cultivating suspicion and competition to prevent solidarity. When workers recognize that these divisions are artificial, engineered to maintain their subjugation, they can redirect their energy from rivalry to cooperation, from envy to mutual support, from isolation to collective strategy. In this context, unity is both a weapon and a shield. It empowers workers to resist exploitation and protects them from attempts to pit one group against another. Collective bargaining, coordinated strikes, mutual aid networks, and political organization all emerge from this fundamental principle that workers are strongest together. Unity amplifies voice and amplifies action. A single workers' protest can be ignored. A lone strike can be broken, but coordinated action across workplaces, cities, and regions creates pressure that cannot be withstood. The economy, the lifeblood of the ruling class, depends on the labor of the masses. When that labor is withheld or directed toward common goals, the foundations of capitalist control tremble. Unity also fosters consciousness. Isolated individuals may see their struggles as personal misfortune, yet collective engagement illuminates the systemic nature of oppression. Workers begin to understand that their conditions are not accidents of fate, but results of structured inequality, and that only through their combined efforts can these conditions be altered. This awareness is both liberating and mobilizing. In the absence of unity, the ruling class can dictate narratives, suppress dissent, and fragment resistance. Capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, and other systems of domination thrive precisely because workers are taught to see themselves as separate and at odds. Unity breaks this illusion. It transforms isolated discontent into organized action, personal frustration into political strategy, and passive suffering into active struggle. The practical implications of unity are vast. Collective decision-making, coordinate demands, and shared strategies multiply the effectiveness of resistance. When workers come together, they can negotiate terms, challenge unjust policies, and assert control over the conditions of their labor in ways that would be impossible individually. Furthermore, unity breeds resilience. In the face of repression, threats, or attempts to divide, a unified labor force can sustain momentum, share resources, and provide mutual support. Solidarity networks extend beyond immediate workplaces, linking communities, industries, and even nations in a web of collective strength that cannot be easily dismantled. Importantly, unity among workers is also a precondition for broader social transformation. The power of the working class is not merely defensive, it is revolutionary. Through coordinated action, workers have the capacity to reshape economic, political, and social institutions, redistributing wealth and power in ways that serve the many rather than the few. The notion that one worker or one group can challenge entrenched elites alone is an illusion. Systemic change requires mass participation grounded in solidarity. Ultimately, the true source of collective power lies not in the tools, wealth, or armies of the ruling class, but in the unity of those who create society's wealth. Every laborer, every worker, every person whose life is bound up in production holds potential power that, when harnessed collectively, becomes unstoppable. The recognition of shared interests, the commitment to mutual support, the organization around common goals transform vulnerability into strength, marginalization into influence, and exploitation into leverage, demonstrate that unity among workers is the indispensable source of collective power. Social transformation does not occur spontaneously, nor is it achieved through individual effort alone. It is the product of deliberate organization, conscious solidarity, and a deep awareness of the shared oppression that binds the majority of people together. The structures that govern society, economic, political, and cultural, are designed to benefit a small minority while maintaining the subjugation of the many. These structures are resilient because they are reinforced by laws, ideology, and social norms, yet they are ultimately contingent upon the consent and inaction of those who labor under them. To dismantle such entrenched systems, the working class and oppressed communities must first recognize that their struggles are not isolated incidents but symptoms of a systemic order built on exploitation and inequality. Awareness of shared oppression is the foundation of any meaningful movement. When individuals perceive their hardships as personal misfortune or natural order, they are less likely to challenge the structures that produce those hardships. Conversely, when they understand that wage suppression, unsafe conditions, discrimination, and political marginalization are not accidents but deliberate mechanisms to maintain control, they gain the intellectual clarity necessary for collective action. This awareness generates a sense of common purpose, an understanding that the liberation of one group is inextricably linked to the liberation of all. Solidarity is the natural extension of this awareness. It transforms isolated grievances into collective goals, personal frustrations into shared strategy. Solidarity is not a passive sentiment, it is an active commitment to mutual support, defense of one another's rights, and coordination in pursuit of common objectives. It allows disparate individuals and groups to act as a coherent force capable of challenging entrenched power. Without solidarity, even the most glaring injustices may persist unchallenged as efforts remain fragmented and easily suppressed. Organization is the practical mechanism by which awareness and solidarity are transformed into action. It provides structure, strategy, and discipline to movements that would otherwise remain diffuse and ineffective. through organizations, whether unions, community groups, political associations, or informal networks, workers and press. Peoples can coordinate protests, negotiate with those in power, educate one another, and pool resources. Organization allows collective strength to be concentrated and directed toward strategic objectives rather than dissipated in uncoordinated efforts. Furthermore, organization nurtures resilience. Social transformation is rarely immediate. It requires sustained effort in the face of resistance, repression, and setbacks. Organized groups are better equipped to withstand these pressures, maintain momentum, and adapt strategies in response to changing circumstances. Awareness, solidarity, and organization together create a feedback loop that amplifies power. Awareness of oppression informs strategies for action. Solidarity ensures that action is collective and reinforced. An organization channels both into tangible results. History demonstrates that movements lacking any one of these elements often falter. Spontaneous uprisings may capture attention, but are frequently crushed without lasting impact. Similarly, isolated efforts, however well-intentioned, rarely challenge systemic structures unless they are embedded within organized networks and collective solidarity. Social transformation also requires a critical understanding of the mechanisms that divide and weaken the oppressed. Systems of domination often rely on manufactured differences: race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, religion, or ideology to prevent unity. Awareness of shared oppression allows individuals to see beyond these imposed divisions and recognize that their real adversary is the structure of inequality itself. Solidarity bridges differences, creating alliances that transcend superficial distinction. Organization ensures that these alliances are not merely symbolic but operational, capable of coordinated and strategic action. The interplay of these elements also facilitates the development of collective consciousness, a shared understanding of both the present injustices and the possibilities for a different future. This consciousness is crucial for sustaining long-term movements, as it fosters commitment, educates participants, and strengthens resolve against the inevitable attempts by dominant powers to fragment or demoralize the movement. Moreover, awareness, solidarity, and organization are not only defensive tools, they are inherently transformative. They empower the oppressed, reclaim agency, redistribute power, and challenge economic, political, and social hierarchies. They create the conditions under which society can be reimagined, not as a structure serving a few at the expense of the many, but as a collective enterprise guided by equity, justice, and shared prosperity. Social transformation is therefore inseparable from the processes of education, communication, and mutual support that reinforce awareness, solidarity, and organization. Every act of networking, teaching, coordinating, and standing together strengthens the foundation upon which a more just society can be built. When workers and marginalized communities recognize their common oppression, commit to solidarity, and organize effectively, they become capable of challenging entrenched power, disrupting exploitative systems, and reshaping society in accordance with collective interests, demonstrating that these elements are not optional but essential for the realization of lasting social change. The possibility of a just society is inseparable from the collective action of the working class, for it is the labor of the majority that sustains the wealth, infrastructure, and institutions upon which society rests. A society can appear orderly, prosperous, and stable, yet if the majority of its members remain subordinated, exploited, and voiceless, true justice is absent. The prevailing inequalities, the concentration of wealth, and the entrenched hierarchies are maintained not by natural law, divine will, but by a system that relies on the fragmentation and passivity of those whose labor is the source of all value. The realization of justice, therefore, hinges upon workers recognizing their collective power and acting to reclaim the rights, dignity, and agency that have been denied to them. This reclamation is both a moral imperative and a practical necessity. It begins with an awakening to the reality of exploitation, to the mechanisms by which wealth is extracted from labor and concentrated in the hands of a few. Workers must understand that the wages they earn, the labor they perform, and the time they dedicate are appropriated in ways that benefit others while leaving them with mere subsistence. They must see that the inequalities they experience are systemic, not accidental, and that the suffering of one worker is connected to the oppression of millions. Awareness of this shared condition is the first step toward collective action. Once the working class recognizes that its fate is bound together, the possibility of rising together becomes tangible. Reclaiming rights requires organization, for isolated acts of defiance can be suppressed, marginalized, or ignored. When workers unite in unions, councils, associations, or informal networks, they can coordinate strikes, protests, and campaigns that amplify their demands and assert their power. This organization is not only a tool of resistance, but a framework for building alternative systems of decision-making, mutual aid, and governance that reflect the principles of equity and justice they seek. Solidarity reinforces this collective strength. It transforms the awareness of shared oppression into a commitment to mutual support and coordinated action. Workers must see that the success of one is the success of all, and that protect each other's rights strengthens the position of the entire class. Solidarity erodes the divisions fostered by the ruling class, divisions that exploit differences in race, gender, nationality, or skill to weaken collective power. When solidarity is cultivated, workers become resilient against attempts to divide and conquer, and their demands for justice gain legitimacy and force. Rising together also requires courage, persistence, and strategic vision. The ruling class will resist any challenge to its authority, employing legal, economic, political, and ideological means to maintain dominance. Yet history demonstrates that sustained, organized, and united action can overcome even the most entrenched systems of power. Revolts, strikes, mass movements, and revolutionary efforts have repeatedly shown that when workers act in concert, they are capable of reshaping society, redistributing wealth, and establishing new norms of justice. The reclamation of rights is not limited to economic gains but encompasses political representation, social recognition, and human dignity. Workers rising together can demand fair wages, safe working conditions, access to education, health care, and a voice in the institutions that govern their lives. Such gains do not occur in isolation. They reflect a broader transformation of society that challenges exploitation and empowers the majority. This collective rise also cultivates consciousness, teaching workers to recognize systemic injustice, articulate their demands, and envision a society organized around equity rather than profit. The shared experience of struggle, cooperation, and victory fosters a culture of participation, responsibility, and solidarity that sustains the movement and strengthens the foundations of a just society. Moreover, the act of rising together has symbolic and psychological power. It communicates to the ruling class and to society at large that justice is not a concession to be granted but a right to be claimed. It demonstrates that the working class is not passive, that it possesses agency, and that it can mobilize the resources, skills, and determination necessary to transform social relations. True justice, therefore, is impossible without this collective action. Laws, policies, or reforms imposed from above may provide temporary relief, but they do not address the underlying imbalance of power between those who labor and those who profit. Only when workers recognize their shared strength, organize effectively, and rise together can a society be constructed in which wealth, opportunity, and rights are distributed fairly, exploitation is eradicated, and human dignity is universally respected. The possibility of justice is inherently linked to the capacity of the working class to act as a unified force, to reclaim control over the conditions of their labor, and to assert their rights in a manner that transforms not only their own lives, but the structure of society itself, making clear that the foundation of a just world depends upon the collective empowerment and organized action of those whose labor sustains it. Comrades, we have traced the truth that the rich do not rule because of strength, but because we allow ourselves to be divided, that capitalism thrives by exploiting our labor while keeping us distracted and mistrustful of one another, that the real source of power lies not in the wealth of the few, but in the unity of the many, that social transformation is possible only when organization, solidarity and awareness of our shared oppression guide our actions, and that the possibility of a just society depends entirely on our collective right to reclaim the rights, dignity and agency that have been denied to us. The path is clear when workers recognize their common struggle, refuse the divisions imposed upon them, and act together with courage and discipline. No fortress of wealth or power can withstand the force of our collective action. The chains of exploitation exist only because we have permitted them to exist, and they can be broken only through our unity, our organization, and our unwavering determination to reclaim what is rightfully ours. The time for passive endurance has passed. The hour for solidarity and action is upon us. Workers of the world, recognize your power, unite in purpose, and rise together, for in our unity lies the unstoppable force that can dismantle oppression, transform society, and create the just world we are destined to inherit.